Like and subscribe for more info on products, sales, and training with Pierre Finkelstein.
As an intermediate decorative painter, what skills or techniques are necessary to get better? So that's a fairly broad question, but I would say in general, you don't stop learning. Whatever skill level you are, beginners, intermediate, or if you think you're an expert, you're constantly learning. There's no stoppage to that. And so the more technique you know, the more marketable you are. If you only know, one type of plaster or one wood, that's the only thing you're going to sell. So being able to say, what are the skills? You need to know all your skills, from wood graining, for marbling, for plaster texture, for gilding, paint striping. Any time of decorative painting is a good technique. You may be precluded into your market to being asked, marbling or something, if nobody has it. But then again, my answer to this is that you should still learn it, because then you'll be the only one that does it, and therefore you get the job no matter what. And any skills that involves your hands and your head working at the same time. So things are a little more challenging, where composition and murals and things are always good for any other technique. So that would be my best advice. Who have you learned from the most is another question. That's a tough one. I get to myself in a way. So I'll talk to the personal, but I went to a school, which was a 6-month school, but the most I've learned from it actually are from people that left behind work for me to look at. And what I mean by that is that I've learned more by trying to decipher someone else's technique than someone telling me how to do something. And so in general, I would say that, if I go to a museum, to any kind of public venue or even private, and I see some decorative painting, an ornament painted, some sort of faux marble, and that I have not seen, or I don't know much about it, I'll just spend a lot of time looking at it and trying to see, how would I do this if I had to do this, that particular technique. And in a sense, that has been for me the biggest source of learning, because I had to come up with these techniques that, either were obsolete by all means, or no one else was there to tell you. The second great source of learning is going to be books, any type of old books, old manual, just folios. Our friend Julian here collects also a lot of manuals, and all those folios are not really well explained, but just the actual fact that you could see all those designs makes you think, oh, how would I do that? And that's how I learn the most. All right. Next question. In your years of studying decorative painting, what have been some of the biggest surprises, something that changed your perception? Let me read this again. In years of studying decorative painting, what have been some of the biggest surprises? There's one silly one, is using a roller. I've always, I don't know why, but I've always reluctant to use a roller to apply my glaze. I was one of those, truer than true, and I say everything's got to be applied with a brush. And using a roller was a big revelation. Using those mini fiber, those mini microfiber rollers to apply glaze, even for graining and marbling, has been really a great thing that's been sort of a revelation, because I would never have thought of using them as a method of application. But so that's just an anecdotal part of things. But one of the biggest surprises I would say was that when I started teaching, and some people say, oh, don't give away the secrets, you're gonna ruin the trade, which I learned it from somebody. Somebody showed me their secrets, and they've learned it from someone else either. So it's always been a, you pass it on. But one of the big things that changed my perception of teaching is that each time you teach something, you own it, you make it better for you. You actually, by showing somebody or teaching them how to do it, you master it even further. So the more you teach, essentially, the better you get. You kind of progress higher and higher each time. So that was sort of a revelation when I started writing, the first book, and even starting teaching, is that I thought, oh, I'm creating competition for myself. But in fact, really, one of the misconceptions is that really it elevates you. So whenever you have an opportunity to teach somebody or write down a recipe so you can remember it, that's a good way to learn. All right, moving on. I would love to know more about how you started and where you were trained exactly. All right, that's kind of personal, but we'll do this one now. So I started as a sign painter, and just because I was desperate to find a job in New York, and by accident, I got into graphic design, learning how to design logos and think of that nature. Again, unpaid position, but I just said, well, that sounds interesting. And then one of my first gigs, one guy said, oh, can you paint that? And I said, well, sure, I can. I had no clue how to do it. And I went to the New York Public Library, got the only book on sign painting, read it as much as I could in 2 hours because the library was closed, bought a couple of brushes, and I became a sign painter after that. From sign painting, that taught me a tremendous amount of brush skills. Again, one of those things, I was self-taught except for that book. Nobody wanted really to show me anything. And as a result, you start developing a sense of what you need to know in order to progress. And that was extremely useful. Rather, that being in a school and they say, do this, do that, do it this way. When you're kind of forced to do it because there's no other way, you tend to learn faster. And then from that point, I went to that school in Belgium, the Van der Kellen Institute. And actually, I signed up for the sign painting school. They had a sign painting class, and I had no idea what decorative painting was, or very little. But I was interested in the sign painting, so I really signed up for sign painting. But after my military service, drafted, by the way, I went back to that school, and they had stopped the sign painting classes, or it was reduced to 1 day. And as a result, I said, you know what? I waited 2 years. I saved my money. I have no prospect in my life whatsoever, except doing this school. And decorative painting sounds just fine. And luckily, it was at the time where the sign painting industry collapsed overnight with the arrival of the computer and the vinyl letters. And as a result, I was lucky in New York in the 80s, in 87, that decorative painting was in full swing or starting to emerge. And I got a job at a well-known company that did, it was a small company at the time. Now they're pretty big, Evergreen. And I worked for them for 6 or 7 months. And then I just said, I think I'm probably better working on my own. It's better for me. And that's it. So that's how I learned. But really, the short answer is that the 6 months of training that I had at that school in Belgium was more of a, you learn the ABCs, you do not really learn how to put a word together or write a sentence or any of that. So the fact that I was here in the US and there was absolutely zero school, no training, everything had to be learned or discovered. And that's where you start learning a lot more because you have to do it and figure out on your own how to do that. And that was the biggest learning thing for me, is to not only come up with a technique, but also I had one assistant and I had to teach them. And again, they had not been trained like I have been. And so I had to break things down in smaller increment rather than one big complex recipe. And that was the big training part for me. I'll take a sip of this little beverage. All right, next. Will you ever do a West Coast class when we can travel again? Sure, I guess. I used to take my show on the road, as they say. We had there's a nice outfit in Los Angeles. The Hoppy Brothers, the Full Masters, the name of the school, and I used to be invited once in a while to do a few classes with them. And I guess if there was the opportunity, I would probably do this again. Teaching is something I don't want to do on a daily basis. It's very tiring, and I like to mix them up. But it's really also rewarding to work as a teacher. So, and LA is always sunny, so sure, that's my short one. Is there a program or school that would teach a complete program of decorative arts? That's a good question. So currently, there are not that many schools that offer that type of program. And the 2 or 3 that I know are in Europe that I would recommend in a way. But it's the same thing. It's based on the same sort of idea of the program that I went to, which is a 6-month program. So you know, it's a day per technique, a day for marble, for this yellow sienna, a day for this walnut, and so forth. But there's not a long 2 years or 3-year programs where apprenticeship, where it used to be in the old days, where you spend, you know, a week at school and 2 weeks on the field and so forth. So I will post a couple of classes I really like. There's my friend Jean Sablé in Versailles that does a really great program. He went to the same school as I did, so it's based a little bit on that as well. And it's a pretty good program. But we're reviving here in New York, but I finally have a building where I can teach. So we have a school now, and we're going to do monthly or bi-monthly, or every 2 months, not bi-monthly, program for like a week or so. Somebody's got his mic open, and I hear somebody making coffee or something. Watch it out. There we go. Thanks. It turns out that very few people can sit to a year program unless they're 18 and they're living at their parents. Most professional can only dedicate, 5 days or a week time at the most. And we sort of cater to that type of grouping rather than a long program. But I would be very, very interested, and probably not now, but in the coming years, to do a long time program combined with some field action, things like that. So to be discussed and continued. I see my daughter jumping up and down, screaming at the TV, but I don't know what she's saying. Anyway. Okay, next question, number 10. Where do you see this age-old, wonderful art form of decorative painting going and fitting in our fast-paced, ever-changing digital world, particularly the classic element, trompe-l'oeil, mural, faux marble, faux bois, and the like? Tracy came up with that. I should say the name. That's a great question. That's a really, really good question. And this is my personal view. What I've noticed is that regardless of the trends of the technology, that hand-done work will always survive, no matter what. The technology makes it accessible to everyone and in a cheap manner. But the people that have wealth, or the people that recognize the work of something hand done, will always go back to that. And I'll give you a very simple example that actually rings really, really true. When I started sign painting in the mid 80s, early 80s, all the gold letters, all the sign, every window, every truck lettering was done by hand. overnight, the vinyl came in. So the truck, they didn't have to stay one day in the parking for the paint to dry. The vinyl came in. You would go to the place of business, stick the vinyl on the side of the door while the engine was running, and the guy was at the door. So all of a sudden, that sign painting industry, which was, the common thing, the bread and butter of sign painters, the little hand-done sign for the shops for the pricing, disappeared completely. But the guy that did gilding, subglass gilding, hand-carved sign, the traditional sign, like the more the high-end, didn't stop them at all. And what happens now, you project 30 years later, I mean, I don't know if everybody has 30 years to wait, the sign painting, the hand sign painting is booming. There's a revival of that. So I don't see our trade to disappear. I mean, whenever there's a technical achievement, say in the 90s or 2000 or something like this, Giclée came along. We know where a mural could be done with a printer, essentially, that spats the paint, large size. You could do it on canvas, and then you can brush back a few things there and there. And everybody thought, oh, the mural industry is finished and this and that. Not at all. I mean, yeah, the cheap mural industry was finished for sure. Vegas did 90% of the work on Giclée and printed material. But at the end, the people that do high-end murals or the little second homes or whatever, wherever your market is, the small little restaurant, you're still going to do hand done. So I really don't think that we're going to be affected all that much. And people pay premium now to have a decorative painting rather than a photo. Anybody can get a photo of something that's, a printed, element of that doesn't bring anything to the conversation. Hand painted piece brings a lot more talk. Did you see this? It was hand done. This person came here for 3 days and they painted. There's a story behind it. A digital print is lifeless. It's not useless. There's some great application for it. Even you use a projector to project a mural. Yeah, that's the technology part you want to use. You're using tape. I learned without tape. I had to cut in everything, wipe off with a sponge. I would never not use tape. It's such a great, useful application. So you got to find the good from the world. But I think our industry is safe no matter what for the hand. Where it's really difficult is for the starting and the entry level painters, because it's difficult to rival something that can be bought and printed on, and it's kind of cheap. All right, go on. That was an important thing, so I spent a little bit on that. Question 11 on education, and we go business. If an American wants to attend Van der Kellen Institute program, that's the school I went to in Belgium, do you think it would be difficult for a native English speaker to complete? Any recommendation of what type of thing to submit for admission? So they've gotten very Anglo-friendly over the years. Actually, a couple of people that worked for me in the last couple of years went to the program. They didn't speak a word of French and did fine, because it's a visual art, and a good 80% of your understanding will be by watching somebody do something. And after a few days or a few weeks in the native language of French over there, you should be able to manage most of it. But I would, quite frankly, I would not recommend Van der Kellen. I think it lost its luster. I would probably go to another program like what Jean Sablé is doing Versailles, which is a very complete program, a little more thorough in a way. But again, anytime you're going to learn something visual, I travel to Japan a lot. I work with Japanese craftsmen, and believe me, the language barrier is very deep, and I have a little translator, and we work on techniques and stuff. And as soon as you grab a spatula and you start working, that's your language. The brush is becoming the language that you don't really need a translation, and you can start start fooling English with a Japanese painter. As long as you demonstrate something, they'll, oh yeah, I understand, or whatever, you know. So it's simple.
From everyone here at Faux Brushes, thanks for tuning in.